Welcome to Arise with Christ. We share stories and truths related to the temple. Together with you, our hope is to fortify faith in Jesus Christ and experience joy in covenant keeping.
Angeli, our guest today is Ammon Hasson. You and I know Ammon, but what do our listeners need to know about Ammon?
Well, they need to know that Ammon is incredible. He is currently a student at Brigham Young University studying international strategy and diplomacy, as well as European area studies. Having served his mission in Washington, D.C., Kyiv, Ukraine, and Berlin, Germany, Ammon grew his love for foreign cultures and affairs. As he was living in Ukraine, Ammon was evacuated to Germany to finish his mission, where he was able to work closely with the church humanitarian department to manage the flow of Ukrainian refugees into Europe. A speaker of Ukrainian, Russian, and German, Ammon returned home from his mission, eager to pursue his love of foreign affairs. He works for the Utah National Guard in intelligence collection, and he volunteers with nonprofit organizations supporting Ukrainian refugees. Ammon is also an avid runner and loves spending time in the mountains.
Ammon, thank you for being with us today on Arise with Christ. We are excited to talk to you about your experiences connected to temples. And we know you've had diverse places and languages and experiences related to temples and covenant keepers. So we're looking forward to learning about that. And we just have to say up front that we have known Ammon practically his whole life.
Yeah, my whole known life.
So we love Ammon and we love his family. And so it feels like a sweet privilege to talk to you today. We're grateful. We wanted to ask you first a question about your mission. If you could just give us kind of an overall overview of your mission experience and what that was.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I received my mission call in March of 2020. And a day later is when the church released a statement saying it was going to close down the MTCs due to COVID concerns. And so immediately I received my very first reassignment to do MTC online. And little did I know that was going to be the pattern or the theme of my mission from there on out. But it was a really, really cool experience. And so I started my mission in July of 2020. And I was doing online MTC for 9 weeks is what it was then.
Wow. Learning
Ukrainian from my original assignment to the Kyiv, Ukraine, Moldova mission. Towards the end of my online MTC experience, I received my second reassignment that I really wasn't 100% sure was going to come because it came towards the end of my stay there. And that reassignment was to the Washington, D.C. North mission. And just because of logistics and everything, I ended up staying in the MTC for 11 weeks, which was awesome. Just enough time to keep that language going and to really up my level. And then I was able to go to Washington, D.C., where I stayed for about 8 months until eventually borders opened, visas were able to be processed, and I went to Ukraine. It was the day after my birthday in May 2021, and it was quite the good birthday gift. And I stayed in Kyiv, Ukraine, and served there for about 9 months, so split pretty evenly, until conflicts arose, and eventually the area presidency got the feeling that they needed to move all missionaries out of Ukraine, at which point I received yet another reassignment to finish my mission in the Berlin, Germany mission, where I served the remainder 6 or so months of my mission.
Okay. So you know and love the Ukrainian people. How are they? How are your friends in Ukraine and who have left as refugees? What do you know about how they're doing?
They're fighters, for sure. In Ukraine, as you guys probably know, there's a slogan or a chant or an anthem, you could say. It's when one person says, Slava Ukraina, which means glory to Ukraine. And the other responds, Heroim Slava, glory to the heroes. And they all take that phrase very, very personally because every single Ukrainian is a hero in their country and every single person is fighting for it. And so as I'm talking with my friends who have fled the country and who are still there, it's so cool. They still have this sense of unity. No matter where they are in the world, they're still Ukrainian and they're still going forward in this cause.
That's awesome.
Just this last Saturday, Yulia Tomochko is her name. She was one of my good friends in Ukraine. She was a big famous singer in Ukraine, and she came and she did a benefit concert here. And being able to go there and see her using her gifts and talents for a cause that she believes in was really, really special. So they're going through hard times, but they're still fighters. And that's what I really admire about them.
Oh, that's beautiful. Inspiring for sure. So let's go back a little and hear about your personal experience connected to the beginning of the conflict and where you were and how that transition happened. You mentioned briefly that you were reassigned to Germany, but maybe tell us a little bit more about how that came about, what you were doing in Ukraine prior to that happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a missionary, it's kind of a weird state that you're in. You're not really attached to the news. So a lot of the things you hear are filtered through other people. And so I remember it was probably in about January as things were really, really ramping up. At the time I was serving as a branch president, and members would come into my office and they would talk about this conflict that's going on, say, what are we to do? Like, when are they going to invade? And I was kind of at a loss for words. I didn't really know what to do other than follow the counsel of our leaders, which has always been to have food storage, always be prepared for emergencies. And that's what the church was really heavily counseling at this time. And in my honest opinion, I didn't think anything was going to happen in my non-experienced view of the world.
Were the members pretty worried?
For the most part, they were not very worried. It was just still kind of in the back of their mind, though. Like, we hear all of this is happening. Exactly. At the same time, I was in Western Ukraine, where all the conflict was in Eastern Ukraine since 2014, obviously with Crimea. And so we never thought anything would happen in the West.
You felt like you were removed enough that you had a buffer.
In fact, fast forward a couple months, I was serving in Kyiv when the war broke out, and I was serving with my mission president. And when we first got word that the area presidency had decided to evacuate us, I remember my mission president even saying, really? Like, even our mission, we're in the West, it would never come over here. But then, of course, we fast forward to when the missiles actually hit. And where did they hit first? They hit Kyiv. They hit Western cities. And so it was just inspired counsel on the part of our leaders. And so that was about where I was at the time. I was serving in Kyiv next to my mission president. And so I had a lot of opportunities to be right there in the middle, trying to get missionaries from the crooks and crannies of Ukraine up to the capital so we could all fly out to our reassignments. It was a crazy time, but definitely led by the Lord.
How soon were you flying out and leaving Kyiv? How long had it been since the area, was it the area authorities came and said?
So it was 48 hours, and it was President Bohm was our area authority. And how it happened at first, actually, my companion and I had just finished our personal study, and we were about to go on the streets, start street contacting. We get a call from our mission president, and he's an Australian guy, and so we always use his voice with an Australian accent. He says, Elders, how quick can you come to my apartment? We're like, oh no, what's up? He says, I can't really tell you on the phone, just come right now. Goodness. And he said he had received a list of about 30 or so missionaries who were to be sent to other places or ending their missions early because they were already seasoned missionaries. So we said, okay, so we got to work getting these logistics figured out, getting these missionaries up so they could fly out. And then we went to a lesson that night. And we finished the lesson and we look at our phones and we had missed calls from the area office, the mission president, from the church travel coordinator. We're like, oh no, what happened? Oh. And we got in touch with them and they said they decided to pull everybody. And so that night, within 24 hours, we had all the missionaries in Kyiv. And then we held a big devotional in the chapel. And I will never forget that experience. I was sitting up on the stand and President Stratov, he's big, mean Aussie, has no feelings, but he really teared up. And it was as if we were back in the days of Joseph Smith when they, announced the mission calls over the pulpit. He says, Elder Bigelow, Poland,
oh, wow.
Right? Elder Hasson, Germany, Elder Crane, Bulgaria. Some people went to Pocatello, Idaho. Yeah. Some people went to Canada. But the thing was, every single reassignment went through the Quorum of 12, just like every mission call. And so everybody went where they were supposed to be.
Wow, that's amazing. I bet that was an amazingly tender experience to be part of.
And at the end, we sang, I'll go where you want me to go. And that was the feeling that we all felt. And in a sense, we got to practice our Ukrainian values, I guess. maybe not being happy with what was happening, but being fighters regardless for our cause and for our purpose, our missionary purpose.
Wow, that's really beautiful. I remember you talking a little bit more about that, about your experience and your feeling related to being reassigned and your conversation with your mission president. Will you talk a little bit more about that?
Right. Like I touched on, we were confused and kind of frustrated because we had so many investigators at this time. The work was really, really moving forward. And what we were supposed to do, just leave them all behind. I think it was something in the area of 500 active investigators being taught. We had baptisms scheduled for the following weeks. And all at once there were going to be no missionaries. And I remember that night actually kneeling down and praying to know what would happen to them. But just realizing that we have to do everything in our part, fulfill our calling and go where we're supposed to go. And in the end, we were able to turn them over into the hands of the Lord. And he would take care of them. And something I want to say on this matter too, actually. What has happened since then is the members, the men especially, who have stayed in these branches, not only have they been taking the brunt of, the callings of the church, but also the missionary work. And this is a time when people in Ukraine are primed to hear the gospel, and they're filling classrooms in cities like Lviv, where members are teaching people about the gospel. And it's incredible. And not only that, but inactive members have stepped up. This has been a really, really cool time of awakening for the church in Ukraine.
Well, it sounds like you're saying the people were in a preparation to hear the word.
Exactly.
You served in places where there were temples.
I did. I was very, very blessed. All 3 of my missions had temples.
That is so amazing. So what did you see among the members? How did you observe covenant keeping in those places where you served?
Covenant keeping was definitely a focus in the stakes surrounding the temples because, these places where temples are, they are an image of the church, if that makes sense. They're a standard. That's the word I was looking for. Ein Norm. And they're a place where members and non-members alike can look to find spiritual upliftment. And so they took it very seriously, the responsibility, I would say almost, of having a temple in their area and being the people who would staff the temple, right? Who would invite their friends to come to the temple and observe the grounds and in teaching about it so that everybody knew that its importance in their classes and quorums.
And in Washington, D.C., the temple is a prominent landmark.
It is.
And it wasn't open yet, right? That open house and rededication had not yet happened when you were there. But the members were preparing for it and anxiously looking forward to it, right?
They were. It was a daily thing. I remember the temple presidents were actually in one of the wards I was serving in, President and Sister Folger, I should say. And they were brilliant. And they would say every single day, it's as if it's a full-time job. Even though the temple was closed, we're still planning and preparing for this event because when it happened the first time, it was one of the biggest events that turnouts the church has ever seen with an open house. And it was a massive missionary tool. And it was the exact same thing the second time. I can't think of very many open houses that have been extended out of demand to go through the temple, but it was.
Sure. Yeah, and in such a prominent location, such an important part of the community.
Right. And kind of going off of this standard idea, I feel like the Washington, D.C. temple is especially special because it stands as a standard for our country, for the United States of America, and even more so the land of the New Jerusalem. And something that it's really interesting when you read the Washington, D.C. dedicatory prayer because it draws parallels to the Lehitic covenant, right? If you keep my commandments, you shall prosper in the land, which is the promise given to this land, the land of the New Jerusalem. And so it was always really, really special to me about how the Washington, D.C. temple stands as the symbol of that covenant here.
Oh, that's amazing. What did you observe among the saints in Ukraine as far as covenant keeping and how they valued their temple experiences?
It was definitely just as special, if not more, because the distance to get to the temple was greater. Before the temple was built in Kyiv, it was kind of interesting. On your membership records, you can see where people receive their endowments. And I would just be going through records, and every single one was Freiburg, Germany. And it's just incredible to hear their stories about how they would sacrifice to drive or take trains for many, many hours to get to the Freiburg Temple. And that covenant was very, very special for them. In fact, towards the end of my time in Ukraine and as my time as the branch president, the Kyiv temple was the last temple to open up after COVID. So once it opened, we were sitting in a branch council and we got the distinct prompting that our branch needed to go to the temple. And it was going to be a logistical nightmare. Our members were rather poor and we didn't know how we were going to finance the trip out there. But
how far were you from the temple?
So we were in Rivne, and the temple was in Kyiv. So I'd say by train, it's about 6-7 hours. By bus, which is more expensive, it's maybe about 4.
Okay.
Roughly. But by a miracle, we were able to finance the trip to the temple. Now, unfortunately, I got evacuated before the trip actually happened, but everything was set into place. And what was so beautiful to me was 1 week into my time as a missionary in Germany, I got pictures of my branch at the temple, people who I had helped them prepare to receive their endowment,
Wow.
going through and receiving their endowment for the very first time, just seeing their big smiles on their face. And then what we know happened a week after that was the temple was closed again due to the conflict in Ukraine. And so there was just a small window where they could go, and they were able to go. And I've heard from them since saying that that has made all the difference. Remembering and reflecting and even making for some of these branch members, these covenants makes all the difference for them in a time of conflict like this. When their faith is tried, we need that remembrance.
The protection and the added blessings that they can draw on from those covenants is so real to them, I'm sure,
Absolutely.
right now.
Well, and it's not unlike the experience of the early saints in Nauvoo, right?
That's true.
To have those covenants to draw on before they
cross the plains.
Yeah.
And in a sense, that is what's happening. They're crossing plains, they're crossing borders. And in a sense, I draw the same parallels as the gathering and scattering of Israel, right? Right now, Ukraine has been scattered. Members have gone into all countries all over the world. And they're parts of Israel in these places, and they're a strength of Israel in these places. And they're being strengthened through their trials. And the time will come when Ukraine will be gathered again. And the church in that time is going to be so much stronger than before. I've already seen that in the testimonies of the youth that I was able to meet in Germany and other places as well.
Wow. I remember you talking about the saints being able to have missionaries in those different places as they arrived as refugees. And you had a really great experience with that. Will you share that experience?
Absolutely. So it was interesting. Another part of our evacuation is we got evacuated a couple weeks prior to the start of the war. And of course, we thought these reassignments were random. But once the refugees started pouring all over Europe into other places, even like Pocatello, Idaho, you needed missionaries who spoke their language and who could help integrate them into the community. And I remember when it was just starting off, my mission president had sent out a message to me, and I think it was 2 other Ukrainian, Russian-speaking missionaries who were in Berlin at the time. It said, the Berlin Hauptbahnhof, the main train station, is just absolutely overcrowded with Ukrainians right now. Go see what you can do to help. And my companion and I had no idea what we were going to do. And so that day in daily planning, we just knelt down and said a prayer and said, Heavenly Father, wilt thou guide us? And I was really, really nervous getting on the S-Bahn, the train to get to the Hauptbahnhof that day, because I had no idea where to go, what to do, like how to help, if they even wanted us. And we got off our train to the train station and we see this big crowd of people and we're like, okay, we'll go over there. And we walked over there, and within 5 seconds of stepping into that big wide open space, we just hear, Missionary, Missionary, missionaries. I would turn and I'd see the District Relief Society president in my district in Western Ukraine, Sestra Luba and her daughter Angelica. And they just barely stepped off of a train from Poland. And they had no idea what they were doing either. But luckily, we had contacts in our ward, so we made a couple phone calls. We were able to find a family to take him in for the day, give him ward food, and give them rest because they'd been going for hours on end.
Wow.
And that was a pattern that we saw from then on out.
What a blessing. And it just speaks to that revelation that you talked about, that these assignments were not random. You were placed in those areas where you were needed, and the Lord knew that you were needed there. That's so inspiring.
Yeah, I love to think about how it's revelation at many levels. It was, as you mentioned, the Quorum of the 12. That's where those reassignments were made. And then you seeking personal revelation to act in your sphere and in your circumstance. And then you were there. So there's many, many levels of that revelation.
And that's interesting because we see every single revelation fits together, which means it has to come from one source, being our Heavenly Father.
Exactly.
All truth fits together. I also was thinking about how, in order to go to the temple, one of the questions that we're asked is if we're a full tithe payer. And that's something that we need to be doing in order to receive a temple recommend. And you have an awesome story about that brother in your branch. Will you share that story too?
I do. As you were saying that, I was gearing up. So, I don't know if I've shared this story before, but I guess I have, and I can share it here. Because it was a really special experience for me, especially as serving in my calling. So at the time, I was serving as a branch president, and we're going through tithing settlements, now known as tithing declarations. And it came time to have my tithing settlement with this one brother, and he was awesome. He's older, probably in about his late 70s, and his story is incredible. So before he joined the church, he was actually a pravoslavny priest. And Pravoslav, Eastern Orthodoxy, is the main church in Ukraine. It's very, very prominent there. And he was even a priest there, which is not an easy feat. And that he'd spent his whole career as a priest. Yet he had turned over his whole life, all his traditions. His wife was very against him joining the church, but he did it anyway because he had a testimony of it. And so the time came for me to have my tithing settlement with this brother. And it was really weighing on me. One, because I knew financially he was not a full tithe payer. And that was really, really hard for him. He lived on scraps of bread. And not only that, but just the previous month, I attended the funeral of his wife. And that was really, really hard for him. And I didn't know what I was going to do in the interview. But we came down, and I was talking with him and about his situation and simply asked, "Are you a full tithe payer?" To which he said no. And at that moment, the prompting that came to me was to invite him to be a full tithe payer anyway. But that for me was really, really hard. Here I am, a 19-year-old boy. I'm American. I know nothing about his life. He has so many years on me. I'm out of my sphere completely here.
That is so intimidating.
But the prompting that came in tandem with this was, it's not you inviting him to be a full tithe payer, it's me. And so I invited him to follow the example of Jesus Christ, to live his commandments, and to be a full tithe payer. And the promises that accompany that are promises of confidence in front of the Lord, which he needed right now. And that was something in the interview that he had actually talked about. We know that the church has welfare programs, but he had never participated in them because he felt guilty about taking part of them because he wasn't a full tithe payer. And so he simply invited him to do it, to take the leap of faith, and that the Lord would be there for him and the church would be there for him as he did so. And the next week, as I finished my meetings before the church meeting, he comes running up to me with a tithing envelope. He says, "Starishino, v'menia moja desyatina." And now I'm worthy before the Lord. And he was so happy. Seriously, I cannot explain his smile. It was so cool to see the change in this brother. And we were able to help him. He was able to participate in welfare programs, and he's doing well.
Oh, I love that. And it makes me think of what President Nelson said at conference just barely. He said, "Each person who makes covenants in baptismal fonts and in temples and keeps them has increased access to the power of Jesus Christ. The reward for keeping covenants with God is heavenly power." And it's amazing to see that power come to play in someone's life.
It's tangible almost.
Yes. The transformative power of Jesus Christ and covenant keeping. So thank you for sharing that. I love that. Kind of switching gears a little bit, Ammon. Thinking about your future and your plans and things that you're looking forward to and that you've already started on as far as your career path, will you talk a little bit about that? And then I have a follow-up question after you kind of tell us what you're up to.
Absolutely. So towards the end of my mission, time started to come. Okay, what are you going to do with your life? And it was a really special experience for me, just taking the steps of progressive revelation. It doesn't come all at once, but you take steps forward and the Lord provides answers. And actually, the day I got home, one of the very first things I did after I got released was go to the temple. And there I had a really, really special experience with the Lord. And the conclusion of this experience was a remembrance of the parable of the talents. And we all know the story about where servants are given talents and they're expected to enlarge the talents that they've been given in the glory of the Father or the Lord. And I realized I had been given very many talents on my mission, the least of which not being my languages. And I realized that I needed to use those and to enlarge them, and that would be pleasing to the Lord. And so that, in combination with my experience with refugees and experience in the capitals of these countries, where I got started into the world of foreign affairs. Right now at BYU, I'm studying international strategy and diplomacy, which talks a lot about these issues. As well as that, I work in the Utah National Guard on intelligence collection, which aids policymakers to make the right decisions on how to help people like my Ukrainian friends, these refugees, and others around the world. And so that's something I've become really, really passionate about, and I would love to continue pursuing and eventually find a life in the area of diplomacy and foreign affairs.
Awesome. I love how you're wanting to use your talents to bless Heavenly Father's children in any way you can, and that inspiration came in part in the temple. Connected to that, people who serve in the military and foreign service can find themselves in difficult situations where covenant keeping might be challenging.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts, or what maybe counsel have you received, or inspiration and direction have you received that will help you when you encounter those situations to continue on the path of a faithful covenant keeper?
I'm really, really glad you asked that question, because that has been the focus of all my thoughts recently, especially as I've already been running into that. And the reality of it is to make the decision now, ahead of time, that this is really what you want. In fact, I was going through one of my seminary journals the other day, and in all caps across the whole page, it was written, "Ammon, you are celestial material. Don't mess it up." And it's the same thing.
We see it too. We agree.
Yes, we do.
It's the renewing of those decisions that you want to be a covenant keeper. It's going to the temple frequently. That's one of the very biggest things I've done, is just attending the temple weekly, such that when I do go on assignment on the weekend and I'm around these hard influences, I remember what I've done in the temple earlier that week and the promises that I've made and the power that I've received. And as well, for me personally, a big help has been the wearing of the garment, the temple garment, the one thing that we can take with us from the temple into our everyday life. And that's something that has been very, very special, especially as I'm able to wear that under the uniform. Now, it may be a different color, but the symbolism is all the same, and it carries the same power.
Yeah, not everyone might know that in the military, you can wear khaki garments, right? Mm-hmm. The church has made that available to those who serve in the military.
Which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah. So you can still be in uniform and have that protection and reminder of your covenants. That's powerful. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to say or share?
I mean, I just love the whole idea of covenants. I thought I had recently, as I continue to get to work with refugees on a daily almost. Yesterday I was talking with two girls who just came 3 days ago from Kyiv. And in light of recent events, I don't know when this will be published, but...
They came here to Utah?
Yep, they came here to Utah. Recently, Ukraine made an attack on the land bridge connecting Crimea to Russia, and in retaliation, Russia sent missiles to Kyiv, and that happened the day after they left. And so, of course, they were a little bit shaken, and they're here.
Oh, wow.
And as I was talking with them, and as I talk with every single Ukrainian refugee, the one thing that stands out to me is just how badly they want to go home. and how much they would do for a guarantee that they could go home someday. And when I think about our covenants and the temple, in reality, what is a covenant? It is a sure promise that we will be able to enter into the presence of the Lord again, that we will be able to go home. Because in a sense, we are all refugees from heaven, right? We were with our Heavenly Father before this life. We're here to learn, to grow. In a sense, Israel is scattered from the premortal life. We're here to be strengthened so that one day we can come back together as glorified beings, right? As joint heirs with our brother Jesus Christ. And so when I think about covenants, I picture a promise that as I fulfill my covenants, I have the guaranteed promise that I'll be able to return home someday. And just thinking about what my Ukrainian friends would do to receive a promise like that, I can't help but not want to do everything in my power to keep these covenants, for there is power in them.
What a beautiful analogy. Do they believe that one day they will be able to return home?
I would say it's more of a hope than a belief, but we know that hope is the first fruits of faith, which is belief. And, it's my prayer and my hope as well that one day they will be able to return home. But we know that our Heavenly Father has plans greater than all of us.
Well, Ammon, on our podcast, Arise with Christ, we like to ask for input or suggestion, one thing that you would give as a suggestion for a way that we or you can arise with Christ in the coming days. What is something that you would do yourself and suggest someone else could do to arise with Christ in their life?
That's a really, really interesting question, especially the phrasing, the wording that you guys use. Because when I hear the word arise, I immediately think to miracles of Jesus Christ when he's telling people like Tabitha in the scriptures, arise, even from the dead. And one that sticks out, especially to me right now, is when the young man was lowered by his friends to the roof, and Christ says, arise, pick up your bed and go on your way. And so when we're talking about arise with Christ, I feel like Christ, he commands us to arise for a purpose, for the purpose that we still have things to do. Right? He redeems us because we're not done yet. And so I guess my answer would be, arising with Christ, remember that you still have things to do here in this life. For me too, something that has been very impactful in my life was that parable of the talents coming home from my mission. You have been risen, you have been redeemed, and you have been given talents so you can make a difference in the world. And I think that's the message that Jesus Christ is trying to teach all of us. That's why he made his great and everlasting sacrifice, so that we could make a difference and thereby receive a difference in our character to become more like him.
Oh, thank you so much. Ammon, we love you and we're so proud of you and we're excited for what's ahead for you and grateful that you're willing to share with us today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you
and your testimony. We are grateful that you joined us today. We would love to hear your stories about how you arise with Jesus Christ. You can find us on Instagram at arise.with.christ or email us at arisewithchrist.temples@gmail.com.